Welcome, everyone. In this series, we're going to cover the official UKC Hunting Beagle Honor Rules as they pertain to our Hunting Beagle format. We're going to break this down in several different series. Eventually, we might have it broke down by each individual rule, but nonetheless, we're going to cover each specific rule in the running rules today. Or in this series, I should say. But before we do that, just a couple house cleaning items here. So the rules that we're going to talk about are going to go into effect on January 1 of 2025. One of the newest changes for the rule book is the fact that the rules are now only going to change every 5 years instead of what we were used to every 2 or 3 years. So that means with 2025, these going into effect here, the ones we're going to cover here, the next rules change won't be until 2030. So that's a little while. So there's a couple things. One of the things you won't see in the rules anymore is the rules for telemetry system use. That is both for telemetry and controlling and tracking, all of that. That will now be something separate that is included in every event packet and available to clubs, available to handlers at all times. One of the reasons and the idea of not having it in the rule book, because there's things, so much changes, technology changes so quickly. Having that in the rule book and not having the opportunity to change it, before the next 5 years makes it tough. So it makes good sense, we feel like, to have that just on its own, that is in the event packet, that we now, number one, can change at any time that we feel it is needed. We can change those telemetry rules, whether it applies to tracking or training device, controlling device features and such. That said, the other two things that are two changes in the rules that are different here than they were previous to January 1 of 2025. Number one has to do with split tracks. During a split track, does not matter how many dogs how many dogs are on each split track. None of that matters. If there is a split track declared, they will no longer award checks or recoveries. The idea behind that is to score the dogs on line, one track or the other. According to the rule, we're going to find that the judge should try to score the track where the dog struck first, that track that dog is on, and then pick that dog or those dogs up and put them in on the split track. So that should be priority number one. Over if you have split tracks, maybe dogs kind of get out of hearing, or you can't judge them well enough to award checks and recoveries and such. And there's a couple other items as well that play a part in that. But nevertheless, whenever you have a declared split track, and only after it has been declared split, no more checks or recoveries on either track. Number two, telemetry system. You can use that now to mark the last spot where your dog's opened up, and that is for the purpose of narrowing a search area in the event that's where the track ended, to search for a hole or PR, place of refuge, or what have you. So you can, in fact, use your telemetry system to mark that. That's just to narrow that area down. The further out the dogs are out 300 yards. The further out they go, obviously your search area probably is going to expand, so to speak. So this helps you, and again, you're going to use common sense with that, but it allows you to not be looking for holes 100 yards away, that's for sure. So, but with that, in this series, you're going to hear another voice. It's not just going to be me. It's UKC's Trevor Wade is going to be joining me. And welcome, Trevor.
Hey, good. Glad to be here. Glad to talk some Beagle rules.
Yeah, we've done this a couple times for some of the other rules we have here. We did it for the Feist rules, and then also your Coonhound rules as well. And they have really helped, I feel like, when we broke it down section by section throughout the rule books. And it's something folks can go back on and I think we're already seeing a difference.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest driving forces behind this podcast and our platform was to try to get more knowledgeable handlers, judges, event officials, and going through the rule book, rule by rule, has been a big help for people. It seems like, I've talked to a couple of our field reps who are out in the field at events, sometimes on a weekly basis. and the feedback they're getting is really good. And honestly, I mentioned this on our Grand American podcast about a week ago. When I'm going to these major events and I'm hanging around there around the deadline and scorecards are coming in, less and less questions up for interpretation and questions coming in. So I think this is only going to make for a more knowledgeable competition field out there.
Yeah, we used to write a lot about, in the old days we had the American Beagler where we do a monthly article and such. The American Beagler has went away, and a lot of our magazines are kind of going by the wayside. So this is kind of a replacement of that, if you will, I guess. And it's also something, the one thing you can easily go back and search, for a certain rule, or search UKC Hunting Beagle Honor Rules in our podcast series or whatever, and probably easily find it. So it's all a good thing. So we're going to record this series, and it'll be broke up in several different ways. The first time it'll probably be broke down in about 2 or 3 segments or episodes, and after that, hopefully they'll break it down by rule and such, and you can just go back and look for a specific rule you might be looking for and just tune into that. So that said, without further ado, the other thing I will cover here before that applies to the rule book, and that is the preface to the Hunting Beagle Honor Rules says this: in addition to the following honor rules and the official UKC Hunting Beagle Rule Book, any related articles published or posted by UKC contain additional applicable rules, statements of policies, and interpretations of UKC rules pertaining to the conducting of UKC events. All event activities, rules, policy applications, and interpretations are subject to the final decision by UKC and its sole judgment and discretion. So that said, hopefully you will enjoy this series, and Trevor will be reading each rule, and we'll go back and discuss each one of those individually. And so we hope you enjoy this, and it is something you find of value to. You're listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast, celebrating hunting dog heritage, competition, and community. United Kennel Club has been the hunting dog sports home for coonhounds, beagles, retrievers, pointers, cur, feist, and more for over 125 years.
Hey, Alan, I don't know if you've been messing around with this new Houndsman Advantage app at all, but I've been playing with it some, and it has some really cool features on it. One, it has the interactive scorecard view where you can assign strike and tree points at the touch of a button, and it automatically totals your scores after each set of points are scored and valued. Yeah, no, I like it as well. Some of the features that I like is that you can access the rules, and that it comes with a search function to easily find any specific rule. Also like that there's a place for your dog's registration numbers, and you can store pictures of your easy entry cards. I like that you can track 2 dogs' performances when out pleasure hunting. You'll find some analytics on your dogs. You can record their accuracy, win percentages, and a whole lot of things like that. No more lying here on this app. The last thing about the scorecard I'll talk about is it has the summary view as well, where you can see the total points you have and the pending points that you have, along with tree timers for each dog. So it's going to come in handy for judges as well. So check it all out on the new Houndsman Advantage app. All right, we're going to start off here with rule number 1, and this rule pertains all to the point system in place for the Hunting Beagle format. And we'll start out with rule 1A that says strike points. One set of strike points, 100 points for dog that opens and is declared struck first, 75 points for second, 50 points third, and 50 points fourth. Yep, that's very simple and straightforward. The one thing that you notice, Trevor, here that's a little different than most of our other segments, third and fourth are exactly the same, and that's 50 points. So the dog that is not necessarily the dog that opens first is the dog that's declared struck first to get 100, and second 75, and then third and fourth are going to be 50 points. Easy. Yeah, next rule 1B is next one here, line points. After a rabbit has been completely circled and seen by a cast member or non-hunting judge, the first dog to trail through the line to receive 100 points, 85 for second, 70 for third, and 55 for fourth.
Yep. So a line is when the dogs have on cottontails. Usually a rabbit will go out and it will circle back around and generally come back to the area close to where they jumped it, and that's where the cast is going to stay at. And they're going to wait. The rules require the dogs to come back around, and when they've made a complete circle, then the dogs are eligible for line points. When we see the rabbit, anyone that sees it, I'm talking the judge or any one of the other handlers, no spectators, but any of the handlers may call a line. And then they mark it maybe going by a landmark of such, might be going by a stump or this little tree or that or what have you. They're going to mark it right there, and they're going to let the judge know, hey, from what direction it came from and which direction it's going. So there's no question about that. And a lot of guys these days carry little laser pointers, and those sure do make it nice just to really point it out instead of standing there and pointing. And because oftentimes guys are scattered out a little bit. And when they come, everybody comes running. When somebody yells line, everybody comes running in because we got to have the judge a majority here in order to score any dogs. So usually by the time everybody's there and whoever saw the rabbit or marked it, they usually don't have a whole lot of times before the dogs might be coming already.
Sure.
So these little laser pointers sure help that. So they mark the dog or mark the line, the exact mark where it is, and that's going to be the line. And then as the dogs come through their first, second, third, and fourth, that's how they're going to score the dogs. So the line points here are given in 1B. The dog that come through first gets 100 points. Second is 85. Third is 70. And fourth is going to be 55. I can tell you line points is something that they have messed with throughout the years of this program, and it hasn't been touched in the last, I don't know, probably 15 years now. But in the onset, in the early 90s, it's something they adjusted here and there to try to get it right, and I think they have got it about as good as they will get it here with this line points: 100, 85, 70, and 55. And I will just say this: if a dog misses a line, does not come through the line, it just simply won't get any points. So there's times when not all dogs do score.
Oh, gotcha. Next one here is Rule 1C, and that's check and recovery points. It says dogs are dogs to be minus 20 points at each check unless all dogs in the cast are declared struck, then no dog to be minused at a check. And then it goes on to say the first dog to recover the check to be awarded 20-plus points.
Yes, this is one that changed throughout the years a couple times, and most recently was not this most recent rule change, but the one before that, so 3 years ago. It changed to where used to always be every time the dogs came to a check, and that is after the dogs are quiet for a whole minute, no dog opens up. After a dog is declared struck, then the judge announces that the dogs are in a check. And a minus is every declared struck dog 20 points. And then the first dog to open up gets the recovery, which gets 20 points. Now, not necessarily just to open up, but it has to. We're going to talk about it later. The eligibility requirements to get a recovery. So it's more than just a dog opening up. They actually have to go back on track again or get the track moving again. So, and we'll talk about it later. But that's the point system for check and recoveries. Now, the only time the new rule, as it states here, the only time you minus dogs 20 points is if not all dogs in the cast are declared struck yet. Once all dogs are in the cast, or all dogs in the cast are declared struck, the judge is still going to announce when there's a check. The difference is just no dogs are going to get minus 20. So let's say we have a 4-dog cast. Dogs A and B are the only two declared struck. They go into a check. A and B are the only two that are going to get 20 minus check points.
Gotcha.
And after that, anytime after all dogs are declared struck, you still go into a check. You just don't award those 20 minus. So that's A, B, and C. So that's kind of the point structure in a hunting beagle event. You have your strike points, your line points, and then your check and recovery points. And that's what makes up the basics of scoring scorable points in a hunting beagle event.
Right. And then Rule 1D has to do with dead tracks. It says, unless it is determined that the track ended in a place of refuge, those dogs declared struck to be minused. If majority of the cast is not declared struck, those dogs receive their strike points position minus. If majority of cast is declared struck, those dogs to each receive 50 minus points.
Yeah, and that is just, the dogs are running the track, they shut up, and sometimes there's the track is considered, maybe if it goes into a hole, obviously that's going to be the end of the track. Or another scenario may be where the dog, where they just flat lost it. They just can't find it anymore. That's also considered a dead track. If majority of the cast is not declared struck, those dogs receive their strike points minus. So in a 4-dog cast, if we have only 2 dogs, A and B, that are declared struck, they're going to be accountable. They're kind of hanging on their strike points to be minus if they lose this track. Now, if they go into a hole, obviously we're going to talk about that later, where obviously we can't fault the dogs for putting the track in a hole or a place of refuge. But for any other, if it's just a simple loss where they just can't find it, just lost it and can't find it and take it on, they're going to get demerited for that. And the amount of demerit points is going to be based on if only 2 dogs are declared struck, they're going to get their strike points minus. If the majority is struck in, or if all dogs or majority is declared struck, then they're all going to get the same amount of demerit points. So that's the difference. And that rule right there, it kind of makes them accountable for their mouth. So a dog that opens up a little more, a little too much maybe sometimes, is also, they need to be making good on it, or they're going to get demerited for it. And it kind of holds them accountable, this rule right here.
Yep, that's right. And then Rule 1E rounds out Rule 1 here, and it is about switching split tracks. And it said dogs found to have switched tracks and joined a split track shall be minus 50 points. Unless their strike points have already been secured, those points shall be deleted, and dogs shall be declared struck for next available position.
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 things going on here in this last part of Section 1 in the rules, and it's about split tracks. So whenever you have a split track, they may start on split tracks, or they may be on one track and all of a sudden you realize, hey, they are obviously on 2 different rabbits. And that happens sometimes. And sometimes it's just while they're running a track, another rabbit jumps up in front of the dog somewhere and veers off to the right. A couple of dogs, it might be a sight chase. You can't really tell, who split up or what have you. But it's important to know that if a dogs are on a split track, sometimes that they obviously were on a split track and they went and joined the opposite track. That's, if you know that, then you demerit those dogs 50 points, because they should stay on the track that they're on until they have been scored and then put back together. And we're going to talk about that later on in this series as well. But just if they're on split tracks and they switch, in other words, they go join the opposite track, they're going to get minus 50 points. And in doing so, if their strike points have already been secured, so what is a strike points being secured? That means if they've already scored, if their strike points are already plussed or what have you, that means they are already secured and such. And scored. And if not, those strike points would be deleted. If they have not been plussed already, they would be deleted, and then they would be declared struck for next available position on the opposite track. But let's say they have already been scored, you can no longer get double whammy on strike points, for one track, and then we're going to try to score them and pick them up and put them on the opposite track. When they open up on this second track again, they can't get another set of strike points. They can only get one set of strike points. The only way they're going to get the next available on this opposite track is if their strike points weren't already scored on the first track. So I think that should about cover that. So that's Section 1 there. I don't know if you got any questions or anything else we should add to that.
No, I think you covered that pretty well.
Good.
That's kind of the bones of it, huh?
All right, so that's Section 1 of the Hunting Beagle Rulebook.
Alan, you've been feeding Eukanuba dog feed for a while now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have, and I've really been able to put my Beagles to the test, mainly running snowshoe hare up north where they run the hardest, where I put 15, 20, 25 miles on them easily in a day. And I've found that the premium performance sport has really paid dividends. Mainly, I noticed their stamina.
Yeah, same feed that I've been feeding. I think my dog looks good on it. He's really feeling good, and less kennel cleanup for me, so I highly recommend it as well.
Eukanuba, the official performance dog nutrition partner of UKC.
Rule 2 of the Hunting Beagle rulebook has to do with everybody's favorite kind of points, plus points. And we'll start here with Rule 2A, and 2A reads, on strike for all dogs declared struck, after judge has determined rabbit is produced. Produced is defined as 1, when the dogs have circled back, and 2, at the point where the judge approves that a line may be marked as soon as the rabbit is seen.
This is a newer rule, produced, as it pertains to the term produced in this rule. I think it was the last rule change, so in 2020-ish, where that produced rule came in. And it used to be that you could never plus strike points on a dog until you scored a line. That has now been changed to, and the reason they wanted it changed was because sometimes in the summertime and when you have a lot of undergrowth, you might not actually ever see the rabbit come right close by you, and the dogs did everything right. Dogs did absolutely nothing wrong. You just simply could not see the rabbit.
Right.
So at some point we wanted to, instead of making them eligible to have their strike points plussed, that we want to have a different rule or a different requirement. So that's where we came up with produced. So that's what this Rule 2A talks about is produced and the definition of it. So when the dogs need to strike, take the rabbit out and circle it back to the hunters. At that point, it's basically you're also going to be looking for a rabbit and calling a line. Now, you can't just look for it right away. They have to, in other words, if we see the rabbit out in front of us still going away, we can't call a line. They have to make a full circle on it. So, and the same is true for producing it. Just because we've seen it going away doesn't mean we're going to plus the strike points. It's at the point when they have turned it back and the dogs have also circled back at the point when the judge is going to say, okay, guys, as soon as you see a line, call a line. That's when he should also plus the strike points. But there's a key part in there when the dogs have circled back. Let me give you a scenario when they might not have, one where they could, and it happens sometimes. Let's say you have the dog struck up ahead and they are in a blowdown or something maybe. The rabbit has already went out a little bit and the dogs are still trying to get it, still going away. Here comes a rabbit in front of the cast. It might have just been a pretty short circle. We don't know if this is the rabbit that they're running or not. The dogs haven't even turned around yet. They're still going away or trying to work it up. That does not make this rabbit eligible for produce, or that does not make it a produced, does not meet the requirement, I should say. It's only if the dogs have also turned back and come back. So those two things got to happen.
Good.
And that's to kind of, for a situation like that, to make sure that doesn't happen. Because if we were to do that, they might have just kicked up another one. We don't really know which one they're running yet. We want to be sure that they're running the one that we're scoring them on. So that's why that's in there. So that's basically it. But it just further, and we actually in 2025 we added, instead of when the rabbit has circled back, we changed that to say when the dogs have circled back. And that's only to cover what I just talked about there, to make sure that they are in fact on the rabbit that we're looking at here.
Gotcha. Next one here under plus points, Rule 2B. It says, on recovery after dogs were in a check, the first dog to open honestly, resulting in reasonable forward progress, to be awarded 20 plus points.
This is a rule where it requires the judge just to use a little common sense. And it says, so the dogs have went into a check, and the first dog to open honestly And what that word means, honestly, what it pertains to is you can have dogs that are popping off a little bit or smelling. It's just nothing happening. Just because a dog opened, we're not automatically going to give it the recovery. It needs to. The track needs to get to result in reasonable forward progress, or needs to get moving again. And what is reasonable? I think a rule of thumb is reasonable that it should go back to the way that the way the track was ran before. In other words, we have conditions may be tougher one day, may be really good one day, and they can really burn one, smoke one when they're running. Another day, they're just kind of it's more a picking type of conditions or what have you. So whatever the conditions are, it should get back to that before we give any dog a recovery. That's usually the rule of thumb there. I say it requires the judge using some common sense on it. But then once it gets to that point, he's going to determine, and he'll always, he'll want to know when the first dog to open up, hey, whose dog was that? If he doesn't already know, he might ask whose dog that was, but that doesn't mean that dog's necessarily going to get it. But he'll then determine, okay, because maybe it just opened a time or two and it never really resulted in forward progress until a minute later, or another dog opened up and boom, then it took off and now here we go. So sometimes it's not always the first dog, but oftentimes it is, but not always. Common sense there. It needs to be the dog who opened honestly that resulted in it getting forward progress being made again. That's the dog that's going to get the recovery, and that recovery points is 20.
Next part here, Rule 2C tells us on speed and drive, when non-hunting judge or majority of cast, if hunting judge is used, are present as judge scores dogs online at point where rabbit was seen by a judge or cast member after completion of circle.
Yep, so we've marked a line, and here come the dogs come through. And the one thing, we have to have majority of the cast there, and that also needs to include the judge. Now, that's only, I guess, when you use a non-hunting judge, the non-hunting judge can score a line by himself, score all the dogs. When we're using a hunting judge, the hunting judge and majority of the cast needs to be there. So in a 4-dog cast, that would mean the judge and at least 2 other people would need to be there, and they score them as the dogs come through. Simple.
Looks like the next one's pretty simple too.
And then we plus those plus their speed and drive points.
Next one here is pretty simple too. Looks like Rule 2D tells us on strike and recovery only if dogs catch rabbit.
Yep, you're going to plus strike points if dogs end up catching a rabbit, and that's it. Simple.
Yep. Next one here, Rule 2E. On strike, when rabbit is jumped and seen by non-hunting judge or majority of cast if hunting judge is used, but goes to a hole or place of refuge before completion of circle. And then it goes on to say hole or place of refuge must be verified.
So 2 things here. So the dogs are running a rabbit, and we have seen it. It's not been to the point yet where we could produce it to where we can plus the dog's strike points. But then it breaks down. We end up having a dead track. We go to see where the dogs broke down, and we find a place of refuge or a hole, and we determine this is where the track ended. In that case, if we saw the rabbit, if we did see it, and it's going to have to be again seen by a non-hunting judge or majority of the cast. Majority of the cast saw this rabbit, and it went into a hole or place of refuge. In that case, we can plus the dog's strike points. Now, if we had already produced the rabbit, that really wouldn't matter, other than not for strike points anyway. But this is only in case we haven't produced it yet. We might see them jumping the rabbit up ahead of us here. We all see the rabbit going away. They run it out however far they run it out, and it just stops. It's a dead track. We go to wherever they stop, and hey, guys, right here's a hole or here's a rock pile or whatever. Okay, majority saw it. We're going to plus their strike points. And that's obviously just gives the dogs credit for as it should. And now, if it does go to a hole or a place of refuge, and this is a rule that I'm going to say gets abused sometimes. Right here it says hole or place of refuge must be verified. So before we can say it was a hole, we must verify it. Sometimes we hear sometimes we hear somebody, maybe the landowner, well, there's holes there, or there's something there. That's not what the rule says. The rule says hole or place of refuge must be verified, and that's pretty straightforward.
Got to use that
Gotta go look.
proof gear.
Got to go look. Yep.
And rounding out Rule 2 here on plus points tells us you get plus points on strike if dogs are trailing a rabbit that has been seen by the majority of cast or the non-hunting judge when time runs out.
This is very much like the previous one. If they haven't come around, still haven't come around at all. But in this case, it hasn't went to a hole. It's not a dead track yet, but the dogs just have not we've not produced it yet. We've seen it, but it hasn't come back and met the requirements for us to plus their strike points. But now hunt time runs out. Now we can also plus the strike points on these dogs if majority saw it or a non-hunting judge saw it when time ran out. And that happens oftentimes. When it does happen, this is at the very end of the hunt, where just boom, they jump one and you just happen to see it. There he goes, and we've got 30 seconds left in the hunt, and boom, that's when that happens. But that also allows us to plus our strike points. So anything you notice here in section or Rule 2?
No. All good, plus points.
That's all plus points. Those things happen. We can plus the strike points, or plus our points.
All right, next up is Rule 3, talking about minus points. And Rule 3A tells us you get minus points if reasonable forward progress is not made within any 3-minute period. Reasonable forward progress is defined as a track that is runnable by the majority of the pack, or when it is obvious to the majority of the cast members that a dog or dogs have recovered the track to a runnable state.
Yeah, this happens in rabbit hunts, to where we have talked already in this series. We're going to talk about it some more, that sometimes when a track is considered dead, it ended up in a place of refuge or just shut off and they just don't pick it up anymore. Then there's also this other one where they just keep kind of picking around, but they are not going anywhere with it. They just are not advancing it. They might be advancing it a little bit, but that is simply advancing. Reasonable forward progress and advancing are not always the same.
Right.
Reasonable forward, just because they've advanced it 5 feet, is certainly not going to be reasonable format. And I'm not saying using 5 feet, but I'm just using it as an example here. And if reasonable forward progress is not made within any 3-minute period after you have dogs declared struck, it's going to be considered dead, and those points are going to be minus. Now, if they're just keep picking around, you probably assume that there's no hole or anything there, because they're still picking around trying to move this, and it's just not going anywhere. Reasonable forward progress is defined as a track that's runnable by the majority of the pack. Just because one might take off a little bit, and here common sense does come into play here. And again, you got to kind of consider the conditions and how the rest of the pack has been operating too, I guess. But that's not runnable by majority of the pack, and you want to make sure you don't have dogs just out there dog tracking and things like that, and sounding like they're maybe moving it when maybe they're not really, and some things like that. But once they have recovered the track to a runnable state, or when it's obvious, it's defined as a track that is runnable by the majority of the pack, or when it's obvious to the majority of the cast members that a dog or dogs have recovered the track to a runnable state, is what it says. I guess that's what I was trying to say. But so reasonable forward progress can happen anytime during this track. And the other thing that I will bring up is if it happens in the beginning, let's say you have dog A is declared struck and it moves forward, and sometimes you'll have situations where you have all dogs trying to work here in the same place. You may also have a situation where you first cut dogs loose, they've kind of scattered out a little bit. One dog is kind of by itself in its own area, and he moves it ahead. He's declared struck. Let's call it dog A. He is declared struck. He moves it ahead 50 yards or so, and then the others converge on it. Now they're all in, trying to hark in or what have you, and it breaks down or whatever. Maybe the rest aren't struck in yet or whatever. At this point, now I'm going to start my clock, and let's say before the 3 minutes is up, Maybe it goes into check or what have you. Maybe not. But every time a dog opens up, let's say I have my 3-minute clock running, now, because when I start my clock, I'm also considering, the judge is also considering his 3-minute clock at all times. So if they have, just because we have other dogs opening up or this or that, that's not going to stop my 3-minute progress clock. I'm always going to have it running unless the track is going at a runnable state. Then I'm going to remove my 3-minute clock. But if I still have this 3-minute clock on, we have dog A is the only one struck. Dog B is declared struck. Every time a new dog is declared struck in a situation like that, my 3-minute clock has to start over. Yep. So that's the only time when you might have a track that is not any 3-minute period is when new dogs are declared struck. So, so that you'd have to start a new 3-minute clock. And then the same is true for dogs 3 and 4 or whatever. Once they strike in, I'm going to have to stop my 3-minute clock and restart it in that case.
Yeah, and so moving on to Rule 3B and minus points, and this one here is got a lot of information in it, so we might have to peel this back layer by layer here, so just let me know when you want to jump in here. But it starts out saying, when it is visually evident by the majority of the cast or a non-hunting judge that dogs quit a trail that is being worked, he will be minused.
Yeah, okay, let's stop right there for just a second. We're talking about minus points, and now this is I'm the judge here, and it's visually evident. And oftentimes, if it's visually evident, we've got the dogs that are just they're running this track, like they're running it or whatever. One dog comes out and comes back to us or whatever. It's not like they've broke down there or anything. They're still running it. It's evident that this dog has quit this trail. I'm going to minus that dog.
Goes on to say here, or if none of the declared struck dogs open for a period of 3 minutes, the track will be considered lost and minused.
The difference here in a situation like this, let's say the track has broken down and all of the dogs are nobody's saying anything, and maybe even sometimes they might be coming back or wandering back or whatever, and that doesn't mean I'm going to minus the first one to come back and the second one as they come back. Not in this case, because I've got to consider that they might be they might have put it in a hole or something like that. And some dogs actually, when they put dogs in or a rabbit in a place of refuge or a hole, they might just be done, and sometimes they do come back to the handler, and it's kind of an easy tell. Some dogs are like that, they obviously hold it. So that's different than one that it comes back when the others are all still running. Yeah. And so, but yeah.
Goes on here to say in the third sentence, however, if dogs go back on the track, he will get the next available position.
Yep, and so let's talk about a dog that came out while the rest of the cast is still running. I've minused this dog. He kind of hung around us a little bit, but then he goes back again, and he'll get the next available position. If they're all taken already, he's just going to get that 50 if he goes back in. That's what that says. If we back up just a little bit, I didn't cover the 3-minute period, but if none of the declared dogs open for a period of 3 minutes, the track will also be considered lost and is minused. So it could be the 3-minute forward progress clock, if they haven't made forward progress, or if none of the dogs opens for a period of 3 minutes. In both cases, they're minused. Then we talked about the next available position, and then go on from there.
Yeah, it says once a position has been minused, it becomes available again. However, a dog cannot be struck in over a dog's position that is being held. If all positions are taken, dog will receive 50 points for going back, but these points will be minused every time he comes out. Dog is not to be tied or encouraged to go back.
Yeah, and what that means, we're talking about this dog that came out. So let's say it's dog A or any of the dogs, but dog A, so that was struck in for 100, he's going to get minused his 100 strike points for coming out. If he was, I guess if they're all declared struck, he's going to get 50, but he was holding 100. So that doesn't mean that 100, if he goes back in, that 100 is available to him again.
Right.
No, he can only go to the next available. He can't strike in over a dog that is holding something below that. So that is what that means. You have the same thing in all of our, say, coonhounds, Kurfeist. Oh, that's a very generic rule right there.
And that's kind of it there for 3B. We'll move on now to Rule 3C for minus points. It says each dog declared struck to be minus 20 points at each check unless all dogs in cast are declared struck. If all dogs are declared struck, check minuses are not issued to any dog. If check loss occurs without a recovery, delete any checkpoints and score in accordance with Rule 3D.
Yeah, so that is where the only time dogs get minused a check. First of all, a check is when a whole minute goes by and no dog has opened up. That's now a check, and every dog is going to get every dog that is declared struck is going to get minus 20 points. But that is something newer to, unless all dogs in the cast are declared struck, you don't award those 20 points. So if you read this rule, that's pretty clear there. The only time anybody gets any minus is if not all dogs in the cast are declared struck yet on this track. Once they are, we're no longer going to issue 20 minus points on this track. If check loss occurs without a recovery, so let's say we are in a check and it doesn't go into recovery, then we delete any checkpoints and score in accordance with 3D. So what does 3D say? 3D says when majority are struck in on a track and all dogs are minus simultaneously, then they all get, you draw a line through their original strike points, and minus each dog 50 points is what they're going to get minus. So that's what they're going to get. So what this means, if it ends up in a loss, or it could also end up being in a hole or something where they're not going to get any demerit points, so to speak. But you don't give them loss points or 50 minus points or their strike points and that check both.
Right.
If the check ended up in a loss, you're just going to give them. If it goes back to a runnable state, then they keep that, and then they're also eligible for recovery points maybe. But you don't give them a double whammy, so to speak. You don't give them check minuses and end up giving them a minus for a lost track. Both. Yep. Just give them. It's going to be one or the other, yep. Not both.
Alan, I know we both have new Dogra Pathfinder 2s. How are you liking yours so far?
I'm liking it. I've even had the opportunity now to use mine where I didn't have service, where I download the map of that area, and it works flawlessly. Love it.
I agree. I really like my Dogra Pathfinder 2 as well. I've used it quite a bit the past few months. I really like the crystal clear maps. I like that it doesn't lose service very much, and I don't have many bad things to say about it at all. Dogra Pathfinder 2, the official GPS collar partner of UKC. And he just kind of read Rule 3D there, but you left a little bit of it out, so maybe I'll just read it real quick in the totality of it. It says, when majority of dogs are struck in on a track and all dogs on a particular track are minus simultaneously, in accordance with Rule 3A or 3B, draw a line through the original strike points and minus each dog in accordance with Rule 1D, which looks like that's the dead track rule there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so if their strike points haven't been, or if majority, one of them has to do with majority not struck in. We talked about that earlier here. If majority is struck in, all dogs are going to get 50 minus points. If majority's not struck in, they're going to get their strike points minused, which oftentimes is more. Is obviously for first and second is going to be more than just a 50. First and second is 175. Yep. So yeah.
Next one here for minus points. Rule 3E tells us when handler strikes another handler's dog, they are to receive the called position minus. After minus, position becomes available. For second offense, see Rule 5.0.
Okay, so the first part is, you don't want to strike another handler's dog, but if it's determined that you are going to get whatever position was available at the time you made this missed call. That's the position you're going to get minused, and then it's going to become open again and available to, let's say it was somebody else's dog. They needed to get that dog struck too, but it is available for that other dog. Or let's say there's other situations that can happen here. Let's say a dog just barks one time. Let's say it's my dog. You call your dog, and it's like, whoa, Trevor, that was my dog, and it is determined it was my dog. However you determine that. you are going to get minus that position. But let's say I don't have to call. The dog's only barked one time. We're going to hear a little later here where it requires the dog has to be struck on or before the third bark. But I may choose. I don't have to call this dog yet, so it may still be open. But let's say my dog is. I have to also call my dog on or before the third bark. So if it hasn't barked twice yet, I might not even, or 3 times, I might not even strike it. So it leaves it open. But just because you called it doesn't mean I can't also call it, even though we obviously only have one dog that's opening. I also don't want to, just because you called it doesn't mean I don't have to now strike my dog by the third bark, So, but let's say it did bark 3 times, and I also called it. You called first, and then I did, and it's like, hey, all the same dog here. One of you called the wrong dog. It's determined you called it wrong. You're going to get minus that position, and I'm going to have it.
Right.
Just because you called it, you can't block that position, so to speak.
Right, and that's only on your first offense. Looks like
first
on the
offense.
Second offense, we're going to go to Rule 5, and I'm
5 is going to be.
Feeling that's going to be a little bit worse.
You got the right feeling about that. It's going to be quite a bit worse. That's going to be second offense. I'm going to be done for calling the wrong person's dog.
Yep. And I think you just kind of mentioned this one, Rule 3F, and this one here says minus points. After the first 3 minutes of hunt, dog must be declared struck on or before the third bark. Dog not declared struck on or before the third bark will receive the available strike position minus, then awarded that same strike position. And then again, it tells us for second offense, see Rule 5N.
Yeah, and this is a little backwards here as we're going along here. It seems I'm wanting to talk about a couple things here that play a part we're going to hear in just a minute, just like you read this rule here. But yeah, after the first 3 minutes after the first 3 minutes of the hunt. So there is a grace period, that 3-minute grace period when we first turn loose at the start of the hunt. When you don't have to call a dog. You may call a dog declared struck, but you don't have to. It's a grace period. But after that, they have to be struck on or before the third bark. That's one of the first things that the judge is going to tell the handlers after they've turned loose. 3 minutes is up. What that means is for the handlers to know, hey, we must now strike our dogs on or before the third bark. So now let's talk about this. Rule F talks about the dog that is not declared struck on or before that third bark. It will receive the whatever available strike points minus, and then awarded that same strike position. So what that means is, if I'm the judge and you have not declared your dog struck on the fourth bark or on the third bark, and I'm going to minus your dog now, but I am going to award him those points,
right? Whether
you call him or not. If we've determined it's your dog, he's going to get minused, and we're going to award that. Let's say the dog's open 4 times. You didn't get him struck on the third bark. I'm going to minus it, but I'm also going to now give you that position.
Right.
So, and then for second offense, Rule 5 again, like you said a little bit ago, that's the bad section.
Yeah.
So that's second time I failed to call my dog struck on or before the third bark. My hunt's going to be over.
Next one here, Rule 3G, tells us you get minus points. After the first 3 minutes of the hunt, any dogs failing to hunt for any continuous 3-minute period will receive 100 minus points. Dogs are not to be moved or encouraged to hunt while on the clock. And then it goes on to say, see Rule 5B for dogs failing to hunt for any continuous 5-minute period.
Yeah, so let's say we have dogs out, and it doesn't mean the rest of the dogs have to even be running or anything. They're just out hunting or whatever. We have a dog that comes in is not hunting. I'm saying it is just standing around here is not hunting. I will, as the judge, will put the dog on that. We'll put the clock on that dog. And if 3 minutes goes by and that dog does not take off to go hunting, then it's going to get minus 100 points for not hunting. And if it goes, I'm going to keep that clock running. If it takes off before 5 minutes is up, fine and dandy. I'm going to take the clock off the dog. Or if it takes off before the 3 minutes is up, fine and dandy. The difference is just whether I'm going to give it 100 points or not. 3 minutes, if it hadn't taken off before the 3 minutes, it's going to get that 100 hickey. But if it's 5 minutes, now the dog is also, it says refer to 5N or Rule 5, and that is that's a scratch. That's also a go home thing, not hunting for a continuous 5 minutes. Now they can go out, they can take off, go hunting again, and maybe come back in. I'll just have to start a new clock, But even I want to also, this is a good place to note that just because they go stand behind, just go off the trail here a little bit, and are just standing on the other side of this bush or whatever, I would never suggest judges should follow dogs down through the woods to see what they're doing or what have you. But if as a judge should also be aware, just because it jumps off the trail here in front of us, just goes in the weeds and is standing over here behind this stump or behind this briar patch that I can't see it, I'm not going to take my clock off.
Right.
The dog needs to go hunting, but also be just use some common sense with that. But I'm also not going to follow the dog to see what it's doing if it's, So, yeah.
Yeah. I kind of like the progressive clock there on that.
Yeah.
Next one here, Rule 3H, to do with minus points here. Dogs leaving their track to join a split track receive 50 minus points if majority of cast is declared struck, and any unscored strike points shall be deleted.
Yep, and that's very self-explanatory there. So we have dogs running on two separate tracks, obviously. If a dog goes to join in on that split track, they're going to get 50 minus points. And any unscored strike points are going to be deleted. If their strike points haven't been scored yet, they're going to be deleted. Then obviously they need to be restruck in on that opposite track there. But 50 minus points for joining a split track. Now that's the only time that should happen is if the judge has declared a split track.
Right.
So there you go. That's there's a lot to unpack and unwrap there in Section 3 under minus points. But if you go back through and read that, go back and listen, and hopefully I haven't said too much. Sometimes I think I can say too much and doesn't help. Go ahead, Trevor.
We do have one more here to finish it off. That's Rule 3I for minus points. It tells us here, dogs leaving their track to join a split track if majority of cast is not declared struck receive their strike points minus, and any unscored strike points shall be deleted. If strike points are already secured via produced rabbit, dog shall receive 50 minus points and is not eligible for a new set of strike points on split track. Those may be pretty similar, but rules H and I.
Yeah, that is. And the one I'm looking at, I don't even have that, Trevor, so I'm going to steal yours here for just a second. Dog does leave to join a split track. If majority is not yet declared struck, they're going to get their strike points minused instead of the 50. So the only time they're going to get 50 minus for doing that is if majority is all struck in. And but anything other than that, it's pretty similar to what we just talked about.
Right.
Their strike points aren't secured yet or haven't been scored, they would be deleted in that case. And then it goes on to say if strike points are already secured via like a produced rabbit, if they have already been plus because of the dog produced, dog shall receive 50 minus points and is not eligible for a new set of strike points on a split track. Now that's just if if the strike points haven't been scored yet, but in that case it definitely would. So there you go. Sorry, missed
just
that.
A continuation there a little bit.
All right, I think that covers Section 3. Like I said, there's a lot to unpack there, but go back, listen again, read it, and hopefully it helped to clarify some of those things a little bit.
All right, next rule we're going to look at is Rule 4, and this has to do with circle points. And it starts out here with a little bit of a header here. It says circle points will count neither for nor against dog except when ties are to be broken. So it doesn't count for or against you, but it can be an important part of the tiebreaker process. And the first one here, Rule 4A, tells us, in case of running into a hole or place of refuge, a rabbit that has not been seen by the majority of cast or the non-hunting judges. And it says also cast must locate hole or place of refuge.
Yeah, and that's talking about the points that we're going to circle are going to be the strike points. And the only way we would need to circle them is if they have not been scored yet, like in a rabbit produced or what have you. In that case, and they do come into play. The only time they do is in certain tiebreakers. So we want to make sure we get that right. And circle them when we should be circling them instead of deleting them. But one of them is if you run track ends in a place of refuge or a hole, and we haven't seen the rabbit or majority of the cast or the non-hunting judge hasn't seen it, then we can circle those strike points instead of anything else, or obviously instead of minusing or deleting. You would circle them. And before we can do that, here again, it makes that note, as you mentioned, cast must locate hole or place of refuge. I don't know how you can explain that or define that any different other than you have to go and look for one.
Yep, go verify it.
You go verify it, confirm it. That's what happened before you just say, I know there's some holes over there. So, yeah.
Next one here, Rule 4B, tells us circle points if dogs are trailing when hunt time expires.
Yep, and just like some other situations where you see a rabbit, maybe just in the last 30 seconds of the hunt, dog strike, jump a rabbit, and it happens sometimes. And before they can bring it around, we've seen it, whatever, we can plus those strike points. But in this case, for circle points, dogs are trailing when hunt time goes out. The dog's declared struck. Their strike points are kind of pending at this point. We're just going to circle them instead of deleting them. And it happens sometimes at the end of the hunt, so it kind of gives it, okay, it can't be used for or against them, but maybe in the case of a tiebreaker, we want to give the dog credit for it.
Yeah.
Hunt time ran out before you could do a whole lot else, but it's all part of the hunt scoring.
Yeah. Short rule here, Rule 4C, it kind of finishes out here, tells us circle points if judge has to call time out because of nearness to livestock, buildings, danger, etc.
Yeah, and obviously we want to call dogs off if they get up close to buildings and bother any